Honest J. Nowak. Coming at you live. Alright. A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to HJN Graphix. Today on Graphix, we're going to try something different here. Yesterday I've talked a bit about the duology of the Modern Warfare series because, well, we haven't really had anything new about it, or we haven't really had a Modern Warfare 3 remastered by any means, but it could happen at some point, who knows. Until then though, let's just go ahead and talk about another series of remakes that have been going on, the Resident Evil series. And although of course Resident Evil 1 had been remade at least a few times, it had not necessarily been done in a more recent environment, because there actually did come along some Resident Evil remakes of the original series. Resident Evil 1, however, it seems debatable at this point, because today we're going to talk about parts 2 and 3. I'm going to start off with 2, of course, you know, just for order's sake. So, Resident Evil 2 Remake from 2019. This game itself, I really enjoy. Almost too much, actually. The fact that I was able to play through the main story twice, as both of the main protagonists, Leon Scott Kennedy and Claire Redfield, whom of course is a sibling of Chris Redfield, who was the original protagonist from the first game. This game, of course, gives us a nice, fresh new look at what the original Resident Evil 2 was like all the way back in 1998. And the game itself, 21 years after the original, the remake really does shine. With its graphics, its gameplay, especially with the kind of controls and camera angles. It is in fact a more modernized variant, being a more third-person shooter instead of being one of those kind of games where you have to rely on certain kind of control functions and still camera angles as a way to navigate around the areas that the game sends you to every now and then. The remake, of course, is a whole lot better, a much bigger improvement because of this. But what's even bigger and better would be the soundtrack, the voice work, especially with the main cast, because it's astonishingly well put together. I'm not necessarily a big fan of most of these actors' careers, but when you really get down to it though, you can really expect this to be as modern as possible, with voice work, sampling, sound department, visual departments, and all that put together. Of course, it is a remake of the same exact thing, not necessarily a reboot. As I've talked about before with the Modern Warfare trilogy, a soft reboot had come around, just simply called Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019. But I've simply referred to it as Retold because, as a matter of fact, it's different. But you know what? Resident Evil 2 Remake, in the same way as we have ourselves a more recent Final Fantasy VII Remake, it does seem that remake might have to be the pseudonym that describes the reboots, the same exact sort of thing, made with better graphics and gameplay and all that good stuff. That seems to be the best way I can probably describe them right now, so that's why I typically call them remake, if they're the same exact thing, just better suited for these new generation consoles. But anyways, the story is simply like this. Leon Kennedy is now a new recruit of the Raccoon City Police Department, and is now off to Raccoon City to investigate some murders that had taken place. At the age of only 22 at the time, in 1998, 22 years old, was certainly a young age for an officer at the time. But when you get down to it, Kennedy was determined to do anything possible to find out what happened in that large city, of course, that it had such a huge population. But when us fans knew that there was a remake of Resident Evil 2, we already knew about the story of what the original had shown us. Kennedy goes down to Raccoon City only to find that there's a zombie apocalypse taking place, and eventually stumbles upon the fact that the Umbrella Corporation had released some sort of deadly virus which is in fact capable of transforming these people into certain creatures of all sorts of things. Bioorganic weapons that were originally designed and bred to be a part of government experimentation and eventually usage against evil, by all means. But unfortunately, these BOWs are burly, gigantic, and terrifying, by all means. As the series had progressed, especially between the originals, Resident Evil 1996, up until Resident Evil Village, which is the 8th official segment in the main series, you could really see how much they've evolved over the past 25 years. Yeah, so the timing's perfect. The first one is 25 years old now. It originally came out on the Sony PlayStation in 1996, followed by Leon Kennedy's adventures in Resident Evil 2 in 1998, then in 1999 with Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Of course, I will say for sure that Resident Evil 2 Remake gives us a nice appreciation. From the puzzle solving, to the fact that you have to find certain items in order to progress through the story, up until the point where a helicopter crashes and a giant ball of flame sets in, only for you to get to a point where you can turn on the water valve and turn off the fires, extinguishing them for good. That, of course, is when the first big twist comes into play. Mr. X, whom is one of several different VOWs out there that is more intelligent and cunning compared to many of the others. Of course, at that point in time, you've already encountered the main zombies, and you've also encountered the Lickers. The Lickers, of course, are terrifying four-legged red freaks that can climb on walls and on ceilings and come up at you when you least expect it. If you were able to flashbang them, do so, because that can stun them, giving you the upper hand and able to shoot them down with whatever limited ammo you might have. And then Mr. X shows up, of course, pretty much being the scariest part of the game. And I am not joking when I mean that that part of the game is scary. From then on out, X stalks you all over the place and does everything possible to show up randomly, right in front of your face. When you go turn a corner, that lumbering thing up there with a bowler hat and a trench coat is right in front of you, coming towards you and ready to deliver a falcon punch to you. That is terrifying. Like, this is one of those nice examples of how video games can, in fact, be good even when they're rebooted. Because a lot of people tend to take craps all over the reboots nowadays. This is one of the very few examples that I can at least justify is probably even better than the original. Way better. Not only by the way that it looks, and how it plays, how it sounds, how it controls, and how variety of different things are put together. Because as I've said, you do get to play as Leon Scott Kennedy, but you also get to play as Claire Redfield. Both stories are almost the same in a way, because they both take place at first in the Raccoon City Police Department itself, the station, where it's a pretty big building, comprised of the main hall, a library, a series of offices, and many other things. But then eventually you get to go underground, where you eventually stumble upon the first ever gigantic BOW, whom of course is also the same exact person responsible for the outbreak, William Birkin. And this exact BOW was in fact the first of its kind. What was left of that same exact G virus, as it was originally referred to as in the game, whereas with the original series, it's called the T virus. So here it's the G virus, not T, or C as what more later games would eventually adopt to, but anyways. It goes up until the point where the mystery is solved. The Birkin family is in fact supposedly responsible for causing the outbreak. And they in fact want to exterminate this threat on their own terms. But Kennedy does whatever is possible to stop them from possibly causing any more harm. But then of course, well, you probably guess what happens then. More BOWs show up, more zombies end up coming over the place, lots of cryptic parts start showing up, but they can be easy to figure out if you know what you're doing. And there are some points where they're timed, including the famous countdown scene that happens in the climax of almost every Resident Evil title. where there's a countdown put in place in the top part of the screen, showing that you have a limited time before a self-destruction sequence takes place. That's what's been the climax for a long time. And the majority of Resident Evil titles have similar cues to this. But here in Resident Evil 2 Remake, this is exactly what it is. It's still a great thing to have. It gives you a very limited window to get out of there alive. But even more so, you have one last boss battle to fight. And guess who it is? It's Mr. X, again, whom this time had transformed. After getting beaten down by balls of flames, X's clothes are shredded off, and X's heart is exposed. But it also gives a rather terrifying jaw-dropped sort of look and a huge clawed arm. And therefore, this monster is now referred to as the Tyrant. And this is the last boss that you gotta battle. S. Scott Kennedy, and Leon, of course, just obliterates the crap out of the Tyrant with a rocket launcher. So, I tell you what, with all the other stories that are put into place, all the other things that are also in there, including the Claire story, and then of course there are the extras that are also included in this game. But you know what though? I will go ahead and talk about Resident Evil 3 Remake because, well, I guess it's the only way to go through this whole thing and do it justice just right. But still, I declare Resident Evil 3 to be, wow, something different. But Resident Evil 2, however, is just incredible. I still declare it to be one of the best games I've played. End of story. Mostly for this reason. But at this point in time, let it be known that, well, when I talk about Resident Evil 3, you might see myself differently. Mostly for what it is. As a game, entirely. So if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.